Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Divorce Happens, the podcast where we support you before, during, and after divorce with inspiration, education, a little bit of laughter, because as we know, divorce happens and then you start fresh. And we're here with one of our amazing Fresh Starts experts, Meg O'Neill. Meg, can you tell us what you do?
Yes, hello. First of all, I'm just so excited to be here. I love watching this journey and all the good stuff you put out into the world. So
Thanks, Meg.
you're welcome. I am a digital marketing agency owner and co-founder, along with being a expert community builder. So I focus on really sharing how to build community online in an authentic way.
Yes, and Meg was one of the first people who knew about my divorce. And so
I was.
I feel very excited and hopeful that you're here today to help other people through this journey. So, one of the questions that I get a lot, and that I think when people come to me, Meg, and a girlfriend comes and says,
Hmm.
I'm considering a divorce, I just asked for a divorce. I have two pieces of advice that I always give. Number one is get a therapist.
Yeah.
And number two is don't post anything on social media
Yeah.
yet.
Yes.
So you are a digital marketing specialist who works mostly with women. And a
Hmm.
lot of times you've worked for 2 decades with women going through life changes.
Hmm.
What are some pieces of advice you can give people who are listening about the relationship between your divorce and digital content?
Hmm. Well, I think that the first piece of advice that I would go along with getting a therapist and get a journal too. Maybe it's a digital journal, maybe it's whatever you might be, because I am a processor. Like I personally like to process through storytelling
Me
but
too.
there's
Yeah.
certain things in life, right? We're both the daughters of lawyers. So we have that
Mm-hmm.
perspective in the back of our mind as well.
Yep.
There's certain things that you don't want living on the internet potentially. And in a different scenario, I learned that myself personally through my son's journey of being diagnosed with autism. I share a lot more at the beginning of the journey that now I look back and say, that was his privacy. And I learned that I wouldn't share as much. So always be very, very focused on what you feel is appropriate to share online and what also could be turned against you. We don't like to stay in that energy of thinking. But the written word, my mom always taught me, you don't write down anything that you don't want other people
Yeah.
to potentially see because it's out there and it can be
Yeah.
manipulated as well.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to throw some scenarios at you, Meg.
Yeah.
And I want to say first thing is Jenny always says when we talk about anything with fresh starts or building anything, she likes to turn it around and see what holes it has, right? And
Mm.
that's like figuratively speaking. And I love
Yeah.
that you said that too, right? Where can this become a problem? Okay, what about Meg? Well, I'm
Hmm.
just going to share on my friends only
Hmm.
XYZ. Is a friends only a real thing when it comes to this type of stuff?
No, unfortunately, some friends can be foes and they can change their
Yep.
attitude. I've seen it happen online with people where then certain friends are screenshotting things, sending them to exes, being
Yeah.
used as um, quote unquote proof in custody cases, in also in the money that's being, certain things are used if people are having guests over,
Yep.
things like that. So you want to be really, really careful um, about how much you give away that's going on in your personal life because you unfortunately don't know who's on the other side of that friends only. It could be,
Yeah.
it could also be other people that are not your friends.
Yeah.
And I think also divorce does. Now, if you think you've been married, 10, 20 years, you have a shared set of friends, right?
Yep.
And unfortunately, the human mind wants to take sides a lot of the time too. So those people who are your friends also see the human side of your partner and they also see a different story, right? So you
Mm.
never know what they could be taking and manipulating for
Yeah.
the other
Yeah.
person.
Okay, here's another scenario. Well, I turned my Facebook settings to friends only, right? Or it's not a public post, but I'm going to go post and shit talk my ex
Oh,
spouse, right?
oh, oh, oh.
What would you say to that, Meg? And then this happens, right? These are all real
Yes, it
scenarios
does.
Meg and I have seen happen. Yeah.
And I want to say, like, we're coming from it from a place of non-judgment because I understand I
Yep.
could be that person. Like I
Yep.
could want to like tear them down and write everything that happened, especially if I was very wronged. Like I understand
And
that.
I've seen this happen both, by the way, from the husbands and the wives.
Correct. Like this could
Yes.
be anything.
Yeah.
And what happens though in those situations, especially where I work with a lot of personal brands and business owners, some of your friends could potentially be clients. They could be, or they could be referring you clients. And when we are sharing from the wound of what is happening,
Yeah.
we lose credibility. We are not looked at then as a strategic person. And this is your life. We don't want to have to be in strategy, right? So we
Yeah.
understand there's both end, but that is something where I would tell somebody to write that into a journal. Maybe write it as a text message to your best friend or your sister or somebody that is really, because what I think that comes from the place of wanting to be heard and wanting
Yeah.
to be seen. And I understand that, but there will be a time for that. So maybe in 2 years, you could give the full spectrum of who this person is. Um, but also, you might not even feel like that in 2 years. You
Yeah.
might be so far past it
Yeah.
and not want to look back and say, like, what did I put out there that now somebody has forever?
Yeah. So what's a good way that, like, if you are somebody like both of us process via social media, what would be a way you could tell your part of the story, on TikTok or Instagram or wherever, without muddying the waters too much of the divorce process that's happening?
Yeah. Well, I think one, TikTok is a good place to go because you're not necessarily going to be pushed out to your direct contacts, right?
Mm,
Like you could set it up in a way that you're really because as a community builder, I like to go somewhere and then be able to talk to other people.
right.
We've learned so much that way. So you could set up a TikTok or something where you want to verbally process, but then leaving details out. You don't want to say where you live. You don't want to say people's names.
Mm,
You don't want to give away anything about your children, or something that could potentially be used or turned against you. Even things that we might think as innocent as like going on vacation, or like what could somebody then turn that in and say, well, you left your kids in this time of like,
right.
you
Or you're
know,
spending money
you're
frivolously or
spending money.
something.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
people hire, very good lawyers that
Yep.
can turn things into something that is
Yep.
not the truth. So you have to be wary of that. But you can show up on TikTok and say, I'm going through a huge life transition. I know other women are too. And call in an audience that way. The other thing is like some other creative ways that you could do it too is something like Substack and share anonymously.
Mm, mhm.
You could, if you want long form writing, a blog,
Yep.
there are different ways that you can share without putting it all on the table.
Yeah, and and coming from a place of education, right? Like, this is
Yes.
what I learned from my divorce lawyer, or like whatever it is. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said, like, we are obviously coming from a place of non-judgmental and shame-free. We just really want people to be protected, because
Safe. Yeah.
the thing is that this stuff really does get used in court
Right.
cases.
Yeah.
And like, I love that you keep saying, think about how this can be turned against you. Think about how it can be turned against you. If you're posting that you're going out drinking with girlfriends every night,
Right.
your ex might say she's not home with the kids.
Right.
I could be with the kids, whatever it is, right? So this doesn't need to be shared on social media
Right.
right now. I'm a big fan of, like, when you're going through something, and I did this too, like, call your girlfriends, right?
Yes.
Like Marco
Yes.
Polo, right? Marco
Right.
Polo them, whatever it is, like, but you don't need to be like sharing worldwide until things are a little more settled. My rule of thumb is really until the divorce papers are signed, and
Yeah.
custody especially is like set. I wouldn't mess with social media stuff too much, just because you never know, things can be used against you. What about LinkedIn, Meg? Do you feel like that's a place that people should be sharing their divorce, or holding off on that?
I again, like without any judgment, I think that that's a place where I would definitely wait a little bit longer and depend on how you, especially as a personal brand, you can go about saying things without blatantly saying them, right? You can show,
Yeah.
there are things that you can, but I also don't think that for the majority of people, their relationship plays a role in their work
Right.
necessarily, right?
Right.
Unless you are, so that's not something that there people will notice if you change your name, if
Right. Right.
they'll put
Right.
two and two together. And
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
somebody is a good enough friend, they're going to reach out to you privately,
Yeah.
right? And they're
Mhm.
not going to do like their internet sleuthing. And if they
Right.
do, you're not going to
That's
have
on
anything
them.
out there.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that being said, it seems like a lot of people have a personal brand nowadays. Like,
Hmm.
everybody has a
Everybody
personal
does.
brand.
Yeah.
So, would that be something that you could help people with, Meg, in like kind of figuring out a strategy about sharing this information?
Exactly. If somebody feels like they really need to share this, or say it is somebody who might be going through a domestic violent situation and they are a psychologist or they're a
Right.
and they see where their story can help people and they want to do speaking and stuff eventually, then
Yep.
that's where we get strategic about putting a plan in place of like putting
Right.
your story
Right.
together where it's not sharing from the emotion of it, but it's a
Mm,
third party can even sit with you and say, okay, this is
yeah.
how I would write this
Yep.
so that it's a story versus a verbal vomit
Right.
on video
Yeah.
or
And
something.
sometimes you really need outside people to help you
Yeah.
do that. Yeah,
And say,
100%.
this might not be something that's the important part of the story. Let's take
Right.
that out
Right.
and
Right.
people will be able to
Yeah.
still
Save it
understand.
for the memoirs, I always like to say.
Yeah.
Okay, Meg, what do you do and how can people get in touch with you to work with you?
So I am the co-founder of the Intuitive Marketing Collective, which is a digital marketing agency that helps bring coaches, healers, intuitives. We also do an array of work with people in the aesthetics field, things like that.
Mhm.
Um, I work on the social media side, so we bring their social media out and work on strategy. We also do marketing plans for people who really want to like grow within the next quarter. I run a free networking group on Tuesdays
Mhm.
called the Board Meeting. That's open for anyone to come and make really heartfelt business connections, which is a little bit
Yep.
different than most networking situations. And I share my story online on my own personal Instagram as well.
I love it. Well, and of course, you can find Meg and all of these links on her Fresh Starts Registry profile by
Yes.
going to freshstartsregistry.com/experts. Meg, before we let you go today, if somebody's listening to this, going through a divorce or considering a divorce, what would be some words of encouragement that you could leave them with?
Okay. It's very simplistic, but I think it is one of the most important things is to take 5 minutes to yourself every day, whether that's in the car before you start it, close your eyes, really ground your energy. And whether you're religious or whatever you might be, just ask, like, what is the next right step? Those simple questions can really lead us
Yeah.
in a direction of alignment versus living in our heads and listening to all the voices around
I love
us.
that. I love that question. I've been asking myself the question a lot
Me too.
lately. I love that question. Thank you so much, Meg. This was really invaluable information. I highly recommend if you have a friend going through a divorce, sending them this podcast episode because we don't say this lightly, but social media could make or break your court
Mhm,
case. And so you want to make sure that you know all the stuff before you start sharing on social. So we appreciate
mhm.
you so much, Meg.
Thanks for having me.